You're standing in your kitchen at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning making coffee. Coffee, the same mug, the same motion of your hand reaching for the cabinet door. And in that moment, for reasons you cannot quite articulate, a question arrives uninvited. What happened to the person you were supposed to become? Not the dramatic version of this question. Not the fantasy of being a famous artist or a celebrated entrepreneur. Something quieter. Something more insidious. The version of yourself who made different choices at smaller crossroads. The person who said yes when you said no. Who stayed when you left. Who spoke when you remained silent. That ghost lives somewhere in the architecture of your mind. And this morning, for no particular reason, you feel its presence. This is not about regret in the conventional sense. Regret implies a clear mistake. A wrong turn you can identify and learn from. What we are exploring is something far more complex and far more universal. It is the weight of unlived lives, the silent pressure of paths not taken, the strange grief for experiences you never had and futures you never inhabited. This weight does not announce itself with clarity. It shows up as a vague restlessness, a sense that something is missing, though you cannot name what. A feeling that you are somehow living adjacent to your real life rather than inside it. The philosophers have a term for this, existential debt. But that phrase makes it sound like something you can pay off, something finite. What we are really discussing is more like existential haunting. You are accompanied always by the shadow versions of yourself, the parallel lives that branch off from every significant choice you have ever made. And here is what makes this so particularly troubling. You know, on some level, that those other versions of you are equally haunted by their unlived lives, including the life you are actually living right now. Consider what this means. In one timeline, you took that job across the country. You wake up in a different city, in a different apartment, next to a different person, or perhaps alone in a way that feels chosen rather than circumstantial. That version of you has experiences and memories and relationships that your current self can only imagine. But that version of you also lies awake, sometimes wondering about the path not taken, wondering about the life you're living right now, the job you kept, the city you stayed in, the relationship you chose or did not choose. The paradox compounds. Every life contains within it the ghosts of all the other possible lives. And those ghost lives are themselves haunted by their own unrealized alternatives. It is a recursion of absence, a fractal pattern of what-ifs that extends in every direction. And you are standing in your kitchen on a Tuesday morning, suddenly aware of the weight of all of it pressing down on the simple act of making coffee. Why does this matter? Why spend even a moment contemplating something so abstract, so removed from the practical concerns of daily existence? Because this weight is not abstract at all. It is the unnamed thing behind your hesitation to commit, the quiet voice that questions every choice even as you make it. The reason you scroll through social media looking at other people's lives with a mixture of curiosity and something darker. The source of that peculiar modern anxiety that you are somehow missing out even when you are exactly where you chose to be. The conventional wisdom tells us to let go of regret, to practice gratitude, to be present in the moment. This advice is not wrong, but it is incomplete. It treats the symptoms without acknowledging the deeper structure of the problem. Because the issue is not simply that we regret certain choices. The issue is that we are condemned to choose it all. And every choice, by definition, means saying no to everything else. Every path taken is simultaneously every other path rejected. This is the architecture of human freedom, and it comes with a cost we rarely discuss openly. The psychologists call it the paradox of choice. When we have too many options, we become paralyzed, and even when we do choose, we are less satisfied because we are haunted by all the options we rejected. But what we are exploring goes deeper than consumer psychology. This is not about having too many brands of cereal at the grocery store. This is about the fundamental structure of a human life in a world of infinite possibility. We are the first generations in human history to truly confront this problem at scale. For most of our existence, humans lived in contexts with severely limited options. You were born into a community, a social role, a way of life. Choice existed, but within narrow boundaries. The path of your life was largely predetermined. Modernity has shattered those constraints. We celebrate this as liberation, and in many ways it is. But we have not fully reckoned with what we have lost in the process. When the boundaries disappeared, we lost something essential, the protection that limitation provides. When you have only one or two clear paths available, you can commit fully to the path you choose because the alternatives were never really viable anyway. But when you have hundreds or thousands of possible paths, every choice becomes provisional. You can never be certain you chose correctly because you can never experience the alternative futures to compare. So here's the question we need to sit with, the question that will guide us through this exploration. Is it possible to live fully in the life you have chosen while remaining aware of all the lives you did not choose? Can you honor both the reality of your commitments and the reality of your unrealized possibilities? Or is consciousness itself the trap? The curse of knowing that every version of your life is simultaneously real and unreal, chosen and unchosen, lived and unlived? Most people respond to this tension in one of two ways. Either they deny it entirely, throwing themselves into their current life with a kind of desperate commitment that refuses to acknowledge doubt, or they become paralyzed by it, unable to commit to anything because every choice feels like a betrayal of all the other possibilities. Both responses are understandable. Both are insufficient. What we need is a third way, a framework for holding the tension rather than resolving it prematurely. But before we can build that framework, we need to understand exactly what we are carrying. We need to examine the weight itself. There's a moment in Søren Kierkegaard's journals where he describes anxiety as the dizziness of freedom. He writes about standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into the abyss, and feeling two simultaneous impulses, the fear of falling and the strange attraction to jumping. This is not suicidal ideation. It is something more fundamental. It is the vertiginous awareness that you could, at any moment, choose differently than you are choosing. That your life could, with one decision, become something entirely other than what it is. We inherit from Kierkegaard this crucial insight. The anxiety of unlived lives is not a pathology to be cured. It is the price of being a self-aware agent in a world of genuine possibilities. The person who feels no weight, no vertigo, no sense of the unlived possibilities surrounding every choice is either lying to themselves or has found a way to opt out of freedom entirely. They have committed to a path with such totality that they have stopped experiencing themselves as someone who chooses. They have become, in a sense, their choices. This can look like wisdom. It can look like peace. But there is another word for it: foreclosure. The psychologist Erik Erikson introduced the concept of identity foreclosure to describe what happens when someone commits to an identity without truly exploring alternatives. The person who becomes a doctor because their parents were doctors, who never seriously considered any other path, who simply stepped into a pre-existing template. Foreclosure protects you from the weight of unlived lives by never allowing those lives to become fully imaginable in the first place. You commit early, you commit hard, and you refuse to look back. This strategy has obvious appeal. It eliminates the vertigo. But what does it cost? Consider the alternative: remaining open to possibility, refusing foreclosure. This sounds liberating, and in youth it often is. The person in their 20s who keeps their options open, who tries different careers, different cities, different relationships, is celebrated as someone who is finding themselves. But extend this pattern into the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and the narrative shifts. Now they are seen as someone who cannot commit, someone who is running from something. someone who has failed to become a fully realized adult. So we have two opposing strategies for dealing with the weight of unlived lives, and both exact cost. Foreclosure buys you peace at the price of narrowness. Openness buys you possibility at the price of perpetual uncertainty. Most of us oscillate between these poles throughout our lives, committing in some domains while remaining open in others, and feeling the tension of this contradiction constantly. We want the security of commitment and the freedom of openness, and we cannot fully have both. But there is something we have not yet examined carefully: the question of whether our unlived lives are real. This sounds like abstract philosophical territory, but it has profound practical implications. In one sense, obviously, unlived lives are not real. They did not happen. They exist only as hypotheticals, as counterfactuals, as imagination. But in another sense, they are intensely real. They shape our experience of our actual lives. They inform our decisions. They color our emotions. They occupy space in our consciousness. The philosopher David Lewis proposed modal realism, the idea that all possible worlds are equally real, just not accessible to us. In his framework, there's a world where you took that job across the country, and that world is just as real as this one. You simply happen to exist in this version rather than that one. This sounds wild, and most philosophers reject it as too extravagant an ontology. But notice what Lewis is trying to capture: the way possible futures feel real to us even before we actualize them. We do not need to accept Lewis's full metaphysical framework to recognize the psychological truth he is pointing toward. The unlived lives are real in the sense that they exert real force on us. They are causally efficacious. They change what we do and how we feel. And this suggests something important. The weight we carry is not the weight of nothing. We are not being crushed by mere fantasies. We are responding to genuine features of our situation as choosing beings in a world of multiple possibilities. Here is where we need to introduce a perspective flip, a reversal that changes everything. We have been treating the weight of unlived lives as a burden, something we carry, something that makes our current life harder. But what if we have this backwards? What if the unlived lives are not weighing down our actual life? What if our actual life is one among many, and what we call the weight is simply the recognition of this plurality? What if the problem is not that we are haunted by what we did not choose, but that we privilege what we did choose as more real than the alternatives? Stay with this for a moment. You make a choice. You take the job. You marry the person. You move to the city. And immediately, you begin treating this path as the real one and all the alternative paths as hypothetical. But what is the basis for this distinction? Only time. Only the fact that you happen to be experiencing this timeline rather than another. From a certain perspective, all possible versions of your life have equal claim to reality. This version is real to you because you're living it, but the other versions are equally real in their own right. If we accept this view, even provisionally, the entire framing shifts. The weight of unlived lives is not a pathology. It is accurate perception. You are not being irrational when you feel the presence of alternative selves. You are perceiving the true structure of possibility space. The person who feels no weight, who experiences their life as the only life, is actually the one with distorted perception. They have mistaken their particular instantiation for the totality of what they are. This might sound abstract, but it has immediate practical implications. If the weight is not a burden to be eliminated, but a feature of accurate self-perception, then our entire strategy shifts. We stop trying to get rid of the weight through commitment or acceptance or gratitude practices. Instead, we ask, how do we carry it well? How do we live with the plurality of ourselves rather than trying to collapse ourselves into a single, simple identity? The novelist Robert Musil wrote about something he called the sense of possibility. He described it as the ability to think of everything that could just as well be, and to attach no more importance to what is than to what is not. This sounds like a recipe for paralysis, and for some people it is. But Musil suggests it can be something else, a kind of fluid intelligence, a way of remaining responsive to life rather than rigidly committed to a single narrative about who you are and what your life means. This connects to an insight from narrative psychology. We are not our stories. We are the ones telling stories about ourselves. And we could always tell different stories. The version of your life that emphasizes career achievement tells one story. The version that emphasizes relationships tells another. The version that emphasizes creative expression tells yet another. None of these stories is the true story. They are all partial interpretations of an underlying reality that is too complex and multidimensional to be captured by any single narrative. But here we encounter another paradox. To live it all, you must choose some narrative. You cannot live all possible versions of your life simultaneously. You cannot tell all stories at once. So the question becomes, how do you commit to a narrative, to a path, to a version of yourself, while remaining aware that it is one version among many? How do you take your choices seriously without taking them too seriously? How do you honor both the reality of your commitments and the reality of what you have not committed to? You're standing in your kitchen again, but it is different now. Still 7:30 on a Tuesday morning. Still the same coffee, the same mug, the same motion of reaching for the cabinet door. But the question that arrived earlier, what happened to the person you were supposed to become, no longer carries the same weight. Not because you have answered it, but because you have learned to hold it differently. You have stopped treating it as an accusation and started experiencing it as simple recognition. You are one version of yourself among many possible versions. This version is real. The others are also real in their own way. And both things can be true simultaneously. This is not resolution. This is something subtler and perhaps more valuable, a shift in how you carry the question itself. The existential weight has not disappeared. You have not transcended the human condition of being a choosing creature in a world of multiple possibilities. But you have stopped fighting the weight, and in that stopping, something unexpected has emerged. The weight has become almost companionable, a reminder of your own richness, your own complexity, the multitude you contain. Let us examine how this shift manifests across different domains of life. Start with relationships. You have chosen this person, or you are single, or you are in some configuration between those poles. And somewhere in your awareness, there are the other people you could have chosen, could have loved, could have built a life with. The ghost relationships. For most people, these ghosts create a kind of chronic dissatisfaction. The current relationship is implicitly being compared to an idealized alternative that never had to face the compromises of reality. But what if you could hold your actual relationship, or your actual singleness, while simultaneously honoring the reality of the unchosen alternatives? Not as a way of diminishing what you have, but as a way of enriching it. The recognition that you could have loved others makes your choice to love this person more meaningful, not less. It strips away the fantasy that there is one perfect soulmate for you, which is itself a kind of foreclosure. It allows you to see your relationship as one good possibility among many good possibilities. The same principle applies to career. You have made choices about how to spend your working life, or perhaps you feel those choices were made for you by circumstance, and you carry the weight of the careers you did not pursue, the versions of professional success or creative fulfillment that remain unrealized. The conventional approach is either to double down on your current path with defensive certainty or to constantly question whether you should have done something else. Both responses keep you locked in struggle with the unlived possibilities. What changes when you acknowledge that you could have been many things, that the skills and interests you did not develop remain real even though they are undeveloped, that your current career is one expression of your capacities rather than the definitive expression. You stop trying to justify your choices. You stop trying to prove to yourself or others that you chose correctly. You simply work, fully present to what you are actually doing, while remaining aware that you could be doing other things. Consider the domain of place, where you live, where you have lived, where you have not lived. Every city contains a different version of yourself. The person you are in a small town is not quite the same person you are in a major metropolitan area. The geographic dimension of unlived lives is particularly poignant because place is so tangible. You can look at a map and see the locations where alternative versions of your life might have unfolded. You can visit those places and feel the ghost of the self who might have lived there. Now extend this principle even further. Consider your values, your beliefs, your sense of meaning and purpose. These feel very core to who you are. But they too are choices, and different choices would have led to different value systems, different beliefs, different senses of what matters. The person who committed fully to a religious tradition carries the ghost of the secular self they might have become. The person who rejected religion entirely carries the ghost of the believer they might have been. Here is the practical application of everything we have explored. You can start to make choices from a different place. Instead of choosing as if this choice will define you forever, as if you need to get it exactly right or you will have failed at life, you choose as an experiment, as an exploration, as one way of expressing the multidimensional being that you are. This does not mean your choices matter less. It means they matter differently. They matter as genuine commitments to ways of being and acting in the world, but they do not matter as verdicts on your worth or correctness or success as a human being. The philosopher Bernard Williams wrote about moral luck, the idea that much of what we credit ourselves for or blame ourselves for is actually a matter of circumstances beyond our control. You made certain choices, and those choices led to certain outcomes, but in slightly different circumstances, you would have made different choices leading to different outcomes. The version of you that succeeded and the version that failed are separated not by vast differences in character, but by small differences in timing, opportunity, information. If your outcomes are not definitive measures of your worth, then you're free to engage with your actual life as it actually is rather than constantly comparing it to some idealized alternative. You can stop asking whether you made the right choice and start asking how you can live fully within the choice you made. Not because it was the only possible choice or the best possible choice, but simply because it is the choice you are actually living. There's a practice here, something you can do rather than just something to think about. When you notice the weight of unlived lives, when you feel the presence of the alternative selves you might have become, instead of pushing that feeling away or indulging it, you can acknowledge it directly. You can say internally or out loud, yes, I could have been that other thing. I could have lived that other life. That possibility was real and remains real in some sense. And I am here instead. Both things are true. Over time, this practice changes something. The unlived lives stop feeling like accusations or failures. They start feeling like the natural accompaniment to being alive. Like your shadow. You cannot get rid of your shadow by standing in a different place. It is simply what happens when a solid object encounters light. The unlived lives are what happen when a conscious being encounters possibility. They are evidence not of your failure to choose correctly, but of your capacity to imagine alternatives. The writer Zadie Smith has a beautiful phrase: you are never just one person. You are always at least two, the person you are and the person you might have been. But really, you are many more than two. You are a whole population of potential selves, and most of them will never be actualized. This could be tragic, and in a sense it is, but is also rich. It means you are not exhausted by any single expression of yourself. It means there is always more to you than whatever you happen to be doing or being in this moment. Let us return one final time to that kitchen on Tuesday morning. You're making coffee, but now you are aware that you are not just making coffee. You're also not doing thousands of other things you might be doing in this moment. You are not waking up in a different city. You are not greeting a different person. You're not preparing for a different kind of day in a different kind of life. And all of those not doings are present in some subtle way. They form the background against which this doing, this actual life, takes place. This awareness could make the coffee taste bitter. It could make this morning feel like just one morning among infinite mornings you might be experiencing. But there's another possibility. The awareness could make this coffee, this morning, this particular instantiation of your life more vivid. Not because it is the best possible morning, but because it is the actual morning. Because out of all the mornings you might be experiencing, this is the one you get to taste. So what is the synthesis? What is the framework for carrying the weight of unlived lives in a way that enriches rather than diminishes? It has three components, three simultaneous recognitions that you must hold together without collapsing one into the others. First, your choices are real and meaningful. They shape your experience and the experiences of others. They create the actual texture of your life. You must take them seriously. Second, your choices are not definitive. They are expressions of emphasis rather than expressions of totality. They could have been otherwise, and the version of you that chose otherwise is not less real, just less actualized. You must hold them lightly. Third, the tension between taking your choices seriously and holding them lightly cannot be resolved. It is a permanent feature of conscious existence. You must learn to live with the tension rather than trying to eliminate it. The coffee is getting cold now. You have been standing here longer than you intended, caught in thought, aware of the strange vertigo that comes with full consciousness of your own choosing. But that is fine. That is part of what it means to be awake to your life, rather than simply moving through it automatically. You will reheat the coffee or make a fresh cup. You will move into the rest of your Tuesday, and you will carry with you, as you always have, the silent weight of all the versions of this Tuesday that are not happening. The weight will return again and again throughout your life. In moments of transition, especially, when you stand at another crossroads and must choose one path over others. When you encounter someone living a version of the life you once imagined for yourself and feel that peculiar combination of curiosity and something darker. When you lie awake at night and wonder, without quite putting into words, whether you are living the life you were meant to live. These moments are not problems to be solved. They are features of a consciousness sophisticated enough to imagine alternatives to its own existence. What changes, if you allow it, is your relationship to these moments. You stop treating them as crises. You stop interpreting them as evidence that something is wrong with your life or your choices or yourself. You recognize them as the natural result of being a creature capable of both commitment and imagination. The weight of unlived lives is one such tension. You cannot eliminate it without eliminating consciousness itself, without deadening the part of you that imagines and hopes and wonders about alternatives. Your life is one thread in an infinite tapestry of possible lives. You cannot weave all the threads. You can only weave this one, the one you're actually holding. But knowing that there are other threads, other patterns, other possibilities, does not make your thread less valuable. It makes the act of weaving more conscious, more chosen, more yours. And that might be enough. Not a resolution to the paradox, but a way of living inside it that feels adequate to the complexity of what it means to be human. And when the question arises again, as it will, what happened to the person you were supposed to become, you might find yourself answering differently. Not with regret or justification, but with simple recognition. All those people are still here. They exist as unrealized possibilities within you. They inform your choices even when you do not consciously acknowledge them. They are part of the weight you carry, yes, but they're also part of the depth you contain. And you are here, now, this version, this particular expression of all those possibilities. Not the only version, Not necessarily the best version, just the version that is real in the sense that you're living it. And that finally is enough.